unemployment rate can go up. So it can go up in good times. It can go down in bad times because people get discouraged and just quit looking. So it's not particularly a good statistic. It is a statistic, however, that is released on the Friday following the end of the month. So this is the first number we get. And consequently, as a result of that, everybody pays a lot of attention to it. And in particular, to the extent the economy drives elections, what people tend to focus on is the unemployment rate. That's the number. And it's going to be fairly stubborn for a while. Because the numbers you saw this past week are pretty telling of what's going to happen. Why it's so frustrating for politicians. We gained 290,000 jobs, the most in 4 years. It was a great month, and the unemployment rate went up. Okay? Well, the reason that happened is, as the economy starts to get a little better, they hear their friends are getting jobs and that sort of thing, things are loosening up a little bit, they see more ads out there and that sort of thing. All these folks who gave up looking come back in. About 800,000 of them came back in last month. So even though we created almost 300,000 jobs, we had the unemployment rate actually go up because so many people coming back into the workforce. And there's another 1.5 million, 2 million of them that got to come back in. So we've still got a lot of that to do. So we've probably got a few more months before you see much of a permanent drop in the unemployment rate. You can see a quarter for a month or two, but you probably won't see a permanent drop in the unemployment rate for a few more months. And it has to come about at least by September, preferably August, for the incumbents to be happy. Because it takes a while to sink into people, hey, things will get a little better, maybe I should keep these guys in. So for incumbents in both parties, it's going to be a pretty tough election nationally with the economy this time. But we are in a situation now where we're starting to create jobs with the revision. We've now created over 200,000 in the last 2 months. I think we'll see that pace kind of begin to continue. That puts us on the job growth rate of about 1.4% or so, which will support gross product growth of about 4%. That's not too far off the long-term trends. So we're getting somewhat back to normal in that regard. The census was about a fifth of these jobs. A lot of people made a big deal out of that. It was a nice bump. There's only about a fifth of the jobs that we had last month for census jobs. It's not all the anomaly of the census that goes away in the summer. There's a little bit of that, but not too much. And so basically, we're starting to see job growth again, and that's usually one of the last things to happen in a recovery. Everybody calls it a jobless recovery for the last 6 months. I kept saying it's not a jobless recovery, it's just an early recovery. Because all recoveries are jobless at the beginning. Because people have been burned. We've been through hard times. Things start to pick up a little bit. Well, they're nervous about hiring people. And they don't have to. One thing we saw first was temporary jobs started going up. Well, that's a good sign because that's people putting their toe in the ground, saying, am I going to hire people or not? So they go. So they do temporary workers at first, and now we're seeing them actually beginning to do some actual hiring, which is a positive sign. The other positive sign is it's spread across a lot of industries. It's not all in one industry. We had pretty consistent growth in healthcare employment throughout the recession. Healthcare employment just kept growing and growing and growing pretty much throughout the recession. But very few other sectors did. And now we're seeing a broader base of sectors beginning to grow, which is pretty good news. Now the unemployment rate, and again, a lot of you are kind of in the workforce arena, so you know this. but the unemployment rate, basically, it's the number of people working or not working as a percentage of the workforce, people looking for work, is what the unemployment rate is. Now, interestingly, that number, when they do the news reports every month, it's like the headline is unemployment rate goes up, down, or sideways, whatever it does. The next line is X number of jobs created. Those numbers come from different sources. There's 2 surveys done every month. One's called a household survey. That's basically where you talk to folks at home and say, is anybody working there? Okay, and that's the household survey. And that's where we get the unemployment rate. But the number of jobs created, we go by a different survey called the establishment survey. That's where we call up businesses to say how many people are working there. And that's usually been a better barometer over time. With so many people working at home with the internet and that sort of thing now, I'm not so sure how long it's going to be a better barometer. But it's usually a better barometer of jobs. So those 2 numbers can move just for statistical quirks in different directions sometimes. But fundamentally over time, they do track each other. But it takes a while for the unemployment rate to start coming down. Now, if you take that press release that comes out every month, and you read those 2 numbers, they're all the first paragraph, you keep reading and reading and reading and reading and reading. Somewhere down around the 17th paragraph, they will tell you the average work week. And if you're still awake when you get there, that's a very important number. They never talk about it much, but it's a very important number. At the bottom of this recession, the average work week was a little less than 33 hours. What that means is when the economy starts growing, you can increase production a lot just by having your existing workforce work more. It's now crowding up. It's broken through 33. It's broken through 34. It usually settles out about 36 or so, but you have enough part-time workers, so it never gets to 40. The manufacturing work week gets a little above 40, but the overall average work week, well, nestles around 30, 35, 36 or so before you see a lot of hiring taking place. We're starting to get there. We're getting there pretty rapidly right now. So there's a lot of underlying things that tell us we're doing pretty well. What about Texas? Well, when this whole thing started, a lot of people say, well, we'll just sit this one out. We'll let the country have a recession, but we're not going to participate in this one. After all, we're Texas. We don't have to. And for several months there, Texas kept gaining a lot of jobs while the country was losing a lot of jobs. Now, there were two things going on there. One was they hadn't revised the employment survey yet. When they did, some of that went away. But some of it was real. And the reason was about the time this thing really started getting bad was about the time the price of oil went to $140 a barrel. The price of gas was $12 an MCF. In the state of Texas, $140 oil and $12 gas hides a multitude of sins. And so for a few months there, we did keep growing, while other places didn't, because while energy costs were taking them down, they were getting us a little boost. And so we started doing a little bit better. And so we got to be kind of last into this thing, but ultimately we had to get into it. I mean, one thing that happened was, as you all remember, the stock market fell about 25 or 30%. And they did not send out any announcements. And man, we tried. They did not send out a single announcement that said, okay, your retirement account, your portfolio, your IRA, whatever, is down 25% your stocks. But because you're from Texas, they get to be up 10. We tried to get that, but they didn't happen. And so our wealth dropped like everybody else's wealth dropped. And so we start spending less when that happens. And that feeds its way to the economy. This thing spread all over the world. And people all over the world stopped spending as much money. We're the largest exporting state in the country. 1 out of every $7 that anybody in the world spends in the United States is spent on goods made in Texas. And so when exports go down, Texas has to suffer. I mean, we don't get to sit these kinds of things out. So we went through the same thing. It's very appropriate to say that we did a lot better than the rest of the country. That's a very, very fair statement. We're about 8% of the U.S. economy in round numbers by most measures. The U.S. economy lost about 8 million jobs. So our 8% should have been 640,000 jobs around that we should have lost. From peak to trough, our biggest loss was about 300,000. So if we had lost our fair share, we would have lost 640,000 jobs. We only lost 300,000. That's not saying losing 300,000 is good, but it's saying that relative to the rest of the country, we did indeed do a lot better. And there were several reasons for that. One of them was that that our housing market was not as bad as others. Obviously, one was the energy. I told you that our housing market suffered. The average housing price in Texas went down about 3% on this deal. More in some areas, actually went up a little bit in some areas. You got a relatively healthy housing market around here, all things considered. But it went down about 3%. Now it felt worse than that. One reason it felt worse than that was because of all the headlines around the country. Another reason it felt worse than that is you'd already factored in a 10% increase for next year, and it didn't happen. In our minds, we've already extrapolated a year or so ahead. So we thought, that $100,000 house, we already had it at 110, and then it goes to 97, so it feels worse. It just feels bad. But anyway, we average loss about 3% in our housing values. I gave a speech a couple of months ago, about 4 or 5 months ago, to a real estate group in Orange County, out in California. That was fun. In the zip code where I was speaking at a convention facility, in the zip code where that facility was located, the average housing price was down 45%. Now, the reason our market did not go down as far is a couple of things. Number one, on the whole,